Hello and welcome to another edition of the Paul's Body Engineering Podcast. Another podcast this week, and I'm really excited to bring another one to you. And like I said in the previous one, and remember also, just as a side note, I'm up to 215 episodes. There's been some amazing guests over the years. There's been a lot of chat around things that are very relevant, very educational, and always come from a fact-based content. So, go back through the episodes and I welcome any suggestions on a topic that you'd like me to talk about too. I thought I'd get that off the top. But this week I want to talk about coaching, and in particular, why you need a coach. And this isn't an attempt as a sales pitch, so I certainly want to put that out at the very beginning. It's not a sales pitch. It's actually the importance of having someone in your corner that can identify things that you may not. Because at the end of the day, we can get all the information we need, right? It is at our disposal more than ever between the internet, between podcasts, between YouTube, between social media, between ChatGPT and AI now. You can seek and source everything and anything you need to know about a health and fitness journey, whatever that looks like. If you're losing the weight, if you want to be a bodybuilder, if you want to put on muscle, if you want to change your composition, if you want to learn how to run a marathon, like you can build out everything you need in those assets and get to a point where you don't need anyone. But what you don't get from those things is application. The real problem is applying it to yourself. And that's where so many people fail. Most people think coaching is only for like pro bodybuilders, elite athletes, Olympians, sporting teams, people stepping on stage or lifting big numbers and things like that. But it works for anybody. It works for an absolute beginner. It works for someone who has been lifting for a year. It works for someone who has been exercising for 5 years. It works for someone who has been exercising for 30 years. You can never stop learning in this life. You can never stop learning in your own personal space. And even though you may have a truckload of experience, there's always something new that you can learn. And the thing about health and fitness in particular is that it is ever evolving, because in the background, and a lot of people, particularly the general population, are not aware that there are groups of individuals all across the world constantly doing studies and research for universities and for independent researchers around health and fitness, around the best way to train something, around dieting practices and all these sorts of things. And then when they put that research together, it gets published and that gets put out. And that's what we call evidence-based research. And it will constantly provide changes to the way we do things and how we practice and the best methods forward. And that's what coaching is. It's constantly staying in front of that and then providing the best protocols and practices for an individual, no matter what the goal is, as I mentioned, the real problem for an individual most of the time, and I can attest to this because obviously I've been doing this a long time, is application. It's applying it to yourself. When it's your own body and your own training, it becomes very hard to stay objective. So, while you may think what you're doing is working, while you may think what you're doing has adequate application, because you're fit, you might be feeling the burn of training, or you might be feeling sore afterwards, or you're seeing subtle change. You still can't stay subjective, and then you might start second guessing yourself as well. Does this truly work? So and so said this, or I read this here, or you don't know exactly what the best approach may be. And everyone's chasing optimization. Everyone wants an optimal approach where they can not only get the best result, but get the quickest result too. And if you want to get from A to B in terms of your journey, and A to B takes 6 months, but the way you're doing it, it's going to be A, B, and C, and that takes 12 months. Well, of course, you want to go from A to B, right? So you need to find the optimal approach, and you don't know if what you're doing is exactly that until you get some professional assistance with someone with experience. So, progress can slow down. You wonder if you need to train harder. You wonder if you need to recover more. Then you get a niggling. You get a niggle. You get an injury. Maybe you have a slight strain on a muscle, or you get a little bit of tendinopathy, or you get a bit of tennis elbow, and suddenly you start questioning all these sorts of things. And then all of a sudden you miss a workout, and then your whole week feels like it's falling apart. And then that can lead into the next week, and that can lead into the next week, lead into the next week. And this is where coaching becomes so valuable, because the coach can offer you reassurance. It can remove guesswork. They can provide an objective view, not a subjective view. And you get reassurance from someone who is a professional. Your training also does not exist in isolation. So what I mean by that is you can certainly work a myriad of different opportunities in terms of your training, and they will identify what one is working best for you based on data collection, based on trends, based on your feedback as well. Work stress, poor sleep, family commitments, everyday life, all affect how you recover and how well your body responds to training. These are things that you may be in the middle of right now, but just assume that it is okay. Just assume that it is perfectly normal. In fact, you probably don't even assume, it is just normal. Poor sleep, work stress, family stress, everyday life. It is, if you're in that right now and you just accept it for what it is without the realization that it could be better, well then how are you going to know there's any different? I was having a conversation with someone the other day about this. When, if you're suffering, and this example was with them, if you're suffering from lethargy and low energy, but you're in that and you don't know any better and you don't know any different, how do you know you're in lethargy or you're in low energy? Have a think about it. It's like seeing the forest for the trees, right? You don't actually know that there is light at the end of the tunnel until you experience it. So you've got to put your faith and trust in someone to guide you through that. So this is no different. A good coach does not just look at your program, they look at your life. They will break down your stresses and identify ways to not necessarily remove the stress, but you can manage stress better so that you're not as affected, you're not as impacted. If you've got poor sleep, let's have a look at that. I have a client at the moment who heavily relies on caffeine as a means to get through their big and long days. And that has significantly impacted their ability to get a good night's sleep. So we've spoken about it and we've come up with a plan to slowly reduce caffeine over time. And that's having a big, profound impact on their sleeping patterns and their ability to get a better night's sleep. Therefore, they've got more energy, therefore they can do their work better and they're not as reliant on caffeine. So it works in swings and roundabouts, but it's very much a case of looking at your life as a whole. You could almost call our job life coach rather than fitness coach or bodybuilding coach or health PT or whatever it is, because you do have to look at these things and you have to go a little bit deeper. A good coach will adjust your training so it fits your reality. It's about adjustment to lifestyle rather than saying, okay, you need to train 5 days a week. I don't care. If you can't get to the gym at this time, well, then you get up an hour early. It doesn't work like that. Okay, people will break. They will break down. They will not get it, and then they'll leave anyway. The perfect plan doesn't exist. It's got to be manipulated, adjusted, and customized to the individual. That is critical. And when I say plan, most people default to training plan. I'm talking a holistic plan. Nutrition, lifestyle, days of the week you train, time you sleep, stress management, walking and steps, water intake. Like, these are all fundamentals of health and fitness. So a good coach who has experience in all of those attributes will certainly guide you and give you direction around what's going to work best for you based on your existing lifestyle, so that you can integrate your new training plan into your existing lifestyle. So not too much has to be overhauled, and then over time subtle changes will occur and you'll adapt with it, right? But once you've been lifting for years and years and years, progress can slow down. In some cases you might only add a small amount of muscle or a few kilos across an entire year. This is true. So with our perspective, that feels like a failure, right? And I actually experienced that. I've often put up a before and after of me on stage as a bodybuilder with two comparable photos and two comparable poses. And I've asked the question, what is the difference in weight here? And a lot of people say, 10 kilos, 6 kilos. And until you've seen the photos, it's hard to give you context. But the true reality of that example is there's 2.5 kilos. But the difference is it's 4 years in difference, and I look tremendously different in the after photo than the before photo. The before photo was taken in my first season, the after photo was 2019, so that's a 4-year difference. But you could easily understand why people thought I had 10 kilos on. So muscle mass and development doesn't always equate to scale weight, and we need to realize that. But how do you know unless you've been given perspective or unless you've been taught that? A coach helps you understand that is normal. Progress at this stage is a long game measured in years, not weeks. So coaching is not just about sets and reps, it's about all of those things I spoke about to get the most out of it and squeeze the lemon so that you are maximizing your return and constantly looking at ways to improve every single week, whether it's 1%, 2%, 5%, there's an opportunity for you to do that on your own, but it can be exacerbated tenfold with the assistance of a good coach. And that's what coaching does at the end of the day. You know, it's about guidance, accountability, and having someone in your corner who can see what you cannot. Because let's be frank, you know, you often our own judgment can be clouded when it's about us, right? We often look at our own perspective with bias, with subjectivity, not objectivity. We're our own worst enemy when it comes to critical thinking. We're our own worst critic. So we need to remove that element, and sometimes that's really hard. So the best approach is to have someone who's impartial, who's non-biased, and can obviously see the forest for the trees and give you a completely objective opinion on where you're at, where you're lacking, what you need to do. And that is a week-to-week proposition. You know, if you're tired of second-guessing your own training, you want clear direction, coaching can change that and change the way you approach your progress. You know, you often hear about people going to a coach after a period of time, you know, having trained for themselves for, say, 10 years. Like, I didn't start getting a coach until I was 36. I'd been in and around the gym since a teenager, but I thought I knew better. And I think that's a male thing as well, but I did think I knew better. So I'd just go in and train what I knew what I was comfortable to do. I didn't understand what progressive overload was. I didn't understand what intensity was. I didn't understand what proximity to failure was. I didn't get those things. And I kick myself now, having not known that then, because I would be so much further along. I would carry more muscle mass. I would be more competitive as a bodybuilder. I would be stronger. I'd be fitter. You know, I would have just had more growth across a number of aspects of that journey. And look, granted, you know, I started when I was 36 and I'm obviously 48 now, so I've made tremendous progress. But in those earlier years when your testosterone is higher, your energy is higher, and you're just naturally able to adapt better, that's the window you want to take full advantage of. So that's just my regret there. But my point across this is that, as I said before, coaching isn't just about sets and reps. It's about the bigger picture. It's about stress management. You know, I often talk about disconnecting. Like when we break down stress management, we talk about disconnecting from work. How do you disconnect from work? Well, here's an example for you, and I talk to my clients about this a lot. Work and home life can be integrated so easily. There can be a massive overlap, which can then lead to you never switching off. You're constantly thinking about work when you're at home, and you're constantly thinking about work when you're at work. But the two need to be separated, right? And I know that's not perfect, and I know that is hard to do in some jobs, particularly if you've got a home office, for example, but you still need to have segregation between the two. So your home life is your home life, it's your family life. Your work life is your work life. How do you separate the two? Well, you have a symbolic gesture or a symbolic representation of the disconnect. So for me, and I learned this from a previous boss of mine who taught me that, so his example, and I'll give you his example, was when he went home, he walked through the front door, he put his briefcase down, and that was his symbol to say, right, no more work until I pick that briefcase up and head out the front door for the next day. That was his symbol. I thought, you know what, that's actually a really good thing to do. Now, it took a while for him to actually enable that switch off. It's not going to happen instantly. It's not like a magic button you're pressing, but it can happen over time if you repetitively do it and repetitively tell yourself, right, no more work, no more work. And you keep doing it. Might take 1 week, might take 2. But if the effort is put in and the repetition is there, you will successfully transition and you will have a much clearer distinction between work and home. For me, it was the drive home, because I implemented this as soon as I spoke to him. So I used to work about 20 to 25 minutes away from my house. This was years ago. So my drive home was my switch off. I would disconnect from my phone, okay? I would put on some music. I would listen to the podcast weren't that big back then, so it was primarily music or the radio, and I would take my mind elsewhere. And the drive home would be my symbol to switch off. And then as soon as I got home, it was family time, home responsibilities, etc. So that is just one little, very small example of what a good coach can offer you in terms of breaking down your life and looking at places and implementing improvements that you probably didn't even know were there that can better your position to not only progress, but just feel better. You know, don't feel so tired, don't feel lethargic, enjoy training more, optimize your energy better. Those sorts of things come off the back of those subtle changes. As an example, if you make a 1% change every single week, over the course of a year, you will improve your health and fitness journey by 52%. Imagine that, 50, and that's just 1%, and that's over a week, 7 days. You could make a 1% improvement every day if you really knuckle down. So there's opportunity for improvement every which way, but you've got to want to do it and you've got to invest in it. Now, obviously coaching isn't free. It does cost money. And as a word of warning, you certainly don't want to engage a cheap coach, because when you engage a cheap coach, you get a cheap return, right? So you want to invest to the right amount. I'm not going to say what that is because everyone's different. But you want to make sure that you're investing wisely and you get a return on your investment. So these sorts of things are what good coaches offer. And that'll be clear when you inquire or read their website or whatever it may be. So you'll get a clear indication of what their offer is and how they implement it. But I firmly believe in the process itself. I've had plenty of coaches over the years and they've provided nothing but value. I firmly believe that I've actually learnt more from those individuals than any of the studies I've done, because it's real world application, right? Studies are academic. Coaching provides you real world application, and scenarios are so different. You can't apply what you learnt in a degree to a certain individual at a certain point in time against their certain physiology with certain levels of stress. Like, it just doesn't work like that because there's too many variables. So good real world coaching can provide so much more. So I think that was the point I wanted to get across here, is that, you know, good coaching can really make a massive difference. Like if you're an investor, so if you invest in the stock market, if you invest in a self-managed super fund, if you invest in the property market, if you invest overseas, you will understand the return of investment. You will understand the ROI on the money you put up. This is no different, only it's the return is health. The return is a better life. The return is longevity. That's the return. So I think I'll finish on that note, because that is pretty powerful when you think about it. All right, thank you once again. I hope you are well. I hope you're having a wonderful day when you do listen to this. If you do want to offer any topics for me to discuss, please send me a DM or send me an email. More than happy to do so. If you're interested in any of my coaching services, please jump on paulsbodyengineering.com, or alternatively send me a DM and I'll happily engage with you and have a chat. Again, no obligation, because I'm very relaxed in that space. And once again, as I said in the last podcast, I need to come up with a new sign-off, but I'll stick with the old one for now until I've got a really good one to move on to. So, as I say to every client, every single day, have a great day.